I mean, I'm going to play the DLC. That's not in question. Or well, given that season pass price, I'm going to go ahead and wait and see what the DLC is first.
Yeah, you know what, Kyle? I think you're kind of lying to yourself. Let's see what it is first. The DLC could be an avatar prop of one of the main characters showing the middle finger, and you would buy it.
If it had achievements.
If there was an achievement for the purchase.
Now look, in my defense, I did wait till it was on sale.
Capitalism at its finest.
Yes, I'm back again to Borderlands. It's been an interesting year to say the least, but during the year of hell, we've had a consistent stream of Borderlands content, a consistent stream that I have completely ignored until about 2 weeks ago. Special events, 2 free raids, and a whole year's worth of trying to properly balance the game, which as far as I can tell, they still haven't quite managed, given that I was literally finding legendaries in bins. I have a couple orders of business before we get into the meat of this video. This video is a sequel to a critique of Borderlands 3 that I did last year. You don't have to watch it to understand this one, but I quite like it and would recommend you give it a look. In very brief summary, I didn't like Borderlands 3. I haven't played Borderlands 3 basically since I made that video. I booted it up briefly to try the Halloween event, which was interesting, but the ghost enemy mechanic was absolutely infuriating and I missed all the other events. I'm not sure if it will come up again because it's not my area of expertise, but I have to stress how good this game feels to play. After a year of not playing, I was able to instantly get back into the rhythm of combat. I've been playing as Amara this whole time, so it might be different for other characters, but there's a dance, a flow to combat that's infectious, and combined with the stellar music, makes it one of the best shooters available right now. I don't know if the video can really communicate that feeling, but it is by far the biggest strength of the game. I haven't particularly changed any of my thoughts from the last video. I still consider Borderlands 3 to be a disappointment overall because of the poor quality of the main storyline and its total lack of follow-up on plot threads from the previous games, and even though overall I'd say I enjoyed all of the new content, none of it did anything to mitigate the issues I have with the base game. I stand by everything I said last year. And that's that. Now, we may begin. There's been 4 DLC packs added to the game, of decent size, though some bigger than others. Moxxi's Heist of the Handsome Jackpot, Guns, Love and Tentacles, The Marriage of Wainwright and Hammerlock, Bounty of Blood, and Psycho Krieg and the Fantastic Fuster Cluck. Coincidentally, that order also denotes quality. We're going to go through them in that order, but first I want to acknowledge something. Most of this content was probably created remotely during quarantine. And I have to lump on a whole bunch of praise before I start getting nitpicky because I know how difficult and irritating that must have been, and to still put out such well-polished products anyway deserves a lot of respect. I'm still not a big fan of Gearbox given the stories I've heard from behind the scenes, especially about one Randy Pitchford, but the artists and the programmers and the designers and the composers and all the people who put things like this together, they deserve some serious recognition. They really should get rid of Pitchford before he brings the house down. As I alluded to before, this is my favourite of the lot. In fact, I might even rank it among my top DLCs in the series. It doesn't quite reach the levels of Dragon Keep, but it's up there. There isn't any one thing I can point to as the reason this DLC succeeds, which is good, it's solid in all areas, even if it does suffer from a couple of the same problems that plague Borderlands 3's writing. The plot of this DLC is pretty much explained in the title. It's a simple premise that stays simple. Moxxi wants the space station, board it and recruit a team to take down its new owner, Pretty Boy. I had one thought as soon as I heard about this DLC for the first time. Oh no, not again. Handsome Jack has become one of the most iconic villains in video games, and not without good reason. He's great, but it is possible to have too much of a good thing. First we had his backstory in the pre-sequel, then his post-mortem story in Tales from the Borderlands. We're Handsome Jacked out, we don't need any more. Thankfully, my fears were unfounded, which has to be the most shocking thing in the entire game. That moment I was so expecting where the casino AI takes over and you're just fighting Handsome Jack again. It never comes. He's still in the DLC a lot, but he never feels present in it. The station is covered in his face and there's messages from him all over the place, but he's more like a ghost looming over the casino and the people in it. Namely, one person in particular, my precious boy Timothy Lawrence. My biggest fear with the return of Timothy was that they were going to Aurelia him, totally ignore his pre-established personality and basically just make him Handsome Jack 2.0. They don't do that. They do something a bit odd, namely by giving him what I can only describe as Handsome Jack Tourette's.
Join the club, buttface. Oh, there's that DNA again.
Which is odd. But overall, I think they were able to capture his personality quite well, which I'm thankful for because he's a great character and I think this DLC uses him well.
Wait, sorry, Moxie? Mad Moxie. She's not here, is she? It's fine if she is. I'm not terrified of her at all. I should probably talk to her, though. Yeah, let's talk to her. Let's call her up. Turn on that holostructure, whatever it is, thing. How's my hair?
The other members of this heist are the very French dancer and arsonist Ember, the incredibly unfashionable mechanic Freddy, and the mayor of Trashlantis, who's never given a real name. This DLC, and the others for that matter, gain a lot from staying committed to a core theme, in this case, casino heist. Pretty much every mission is dedicated to the heist, recruiting the people, gathering the right materials, and then putting the plan into action. For my money, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, about Borderlands 3. The best part of this DLC is world building. The Handsome Jackpot is probably the most developed and the most interesting location in Borderlands 3. There's so much history to the station. It was originally designed by Moxie and then built and twisted by Handsome Jack into a trap. Gamblers would come and lose their money, at which point their ship would be impounded and they'd be stuck, indebted to the casino and forced to work their debt off. After Handsome Jack's death, the station went into lockdown, the power went down, and the place descended into total anarchy as gangs began to form and carve out territory. And also everyone went a bit stir-crazy. There was some people who tried to keep the peace, but they all died in the chaos. A man named Pretty Boy, named that as a joke by Handsome Jack, was locked in the control tower when this happened and eventually figured out how to restore the power and bring the loader bots under his control. And despite still being locked in the tower, he's been in control of the casino since then, keeping an uneasy peace between the gangs by using his control over the security system. Pretty Boy is hunting Timothy because he's a doppelganger and all the doppelgangers were given a winning hand, a robotic hand that gives them full access to the station's security systems, which Pretty Boy wants so he can escape the tower. And none of this has anything to do with Moxie's plan to take over the station. This was all in play before the player arrived. None of the areas in the base game of Borderlands 3 have that level of depth. They're all just planets with some people living on them. The only thing going on with them is what's happening right at that moment. And just to heap on some more praise, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that this DLC addresses one of my major complaints about the base game, a lack of diversity of environments. We have the scenic front end of the station with its statues and shops and big flashy lights, then it has the behind the scenes, more traditional space station area of the impound lot, then the compactor, a visual throwback to the scrapyards of the original Borderlands, but also a location that makes sense given how much waste a casino station like this would produce. Trashlantis, I initially thought was a bit silly, and they certainly play up the comedy here, but this is also a location that makes some kind of sense. A collection of people who understand that the station was set up to exploit people and who want to get away from it, but also a collection of people who don't want to fight or join the gangs. What better place to escape it all than a rubbish dump where most people won't be likely to stumble into you? It's also played just so sincere that it's surprisingly easy to buy into this place.
Do you smell that? That's the smell of human camaraderie. Now, what brings you to our little scrap of utopia?
And as I slightly indicated by that, this DLC also addresses a complaint that I didn't voice about the base game, but I should have. Deep at the core of the Borderlands franchise is a critique of capitalism. The universe of Borderlands is one without any form of government. The galaxy is ruled entirely by mega corporations that control everything from weapons to mines to rubbish bins. And not so coincidentally, the Borderlands galaxy is terrible. People are either super rich mega millionaires or barely scraping by, completely at the whim of one of these corporations. The reason why Pandora is the way it is, as explained by the first game, is that the Dahl Corporation came there to mine resources, and to do it they used criminal labour, essentially slave labour. And when they were done, they just let all the criminals go free across the planet. Along with them, they left all the non-criminal workers too. And most of the NPCs you meet in that game are former Dahl employees like Tannis, who had to fend for themselves when the company pulled out. Borderlands 3 quietly avoided dealing with this element of the story. It can't avoid it entirely because, like I said, it's a core aspect of the franchise, pretty much impossible to remove. but they did mitigate it. In the base game of Borderlands 3, you become friendly with 2 CEOs of these mega companies. 3 if you count Mr. Targ, but he's a bit of an exception because it's been made clear in previous games that he's basically just a company mascot. Rhys and Wainwright, however, are both depicted in a fairly positive light, all things considered, wanting the best for their employees and the people who work on the planets they own. Hell, you were Rhys in one of the previous games. The villains of the games were the Calypsos, who didn't have anything to do with the corporations and were instead the leader of the bandits, who've always been more of a secondary threat in the series despite their ubiquity with the brand. This DLC swings completely the other way, and as such it feels way more in line with the series. The Handsome Jackpot is a capitalist hellscape designed to trap and enslave people to Hyperion, and what's so great about it is it doesn't even feel that ridiculous as a thing that could exist. It's a natural evolution of the systems of monetization and gambling and exploitation that already exist today, just with total freedom of any pesky laws and regulations. I only have a few gripes with this DLC. The fact that Freddy turns traitor was spoiled in the trailer, which is not great. Speaking of Freddy, after you meet him, this line of dialogue will play every single time you enter a new area until he dies. And since this is still in the game, it tells me it's going to be there forever, so that's great. The door to get into the secret facility requires a biometric scan, a scan of your outfit, and voice authentication, which means this secret robot factory is one step more secure than Control Core Angel. Also, Timothy's robot hand disappears in this scene. And then there's an old friend back for more. This game's absolute refusal to make any reference to the pre-sequel. Just like Aurelia, despite there being a character from that game, everyone is allergic to making any reference to the events of the game. They keep the fact that Timothy has a crush on Moxie, but don't mention the part where she almost blew him up while trying to stop Jack. The station is powered by a giant crystal, which I immediately recognised as the crystal at the centre of Elysier. Elysier, look, it's never pronounced out loud, okay? But that's never confirmed. One line would have done it for God's sakes, an echolog at least. The DLC does also forget that Timothy was a vault hunter and is actually kind of a badass, but that one I'm more forgiving of because the series does that to pretty much every former character. Visually, this whole DLC is very much a callback to the pre-sequel with all the same Hyperion architecture. It's just so awkward when there's things that should be said that aren't, and I don't understand why they keep doing it. Overall though, I'm very positive on this DLC. What it gets right, it gets really right, and what it gets wrong, well, it gets slightly wrong. So, you know, thumbs up. Oh, but also, how dare you put this in the game and play with my heart like that, you bastards!
Thank you, friend. It's time I tell you something. I really am defective. My power cell's been failing for a while now, and I don't have much time left. This picnic was the last thing on my bucket list, and now I can die happy knowing I made a friend. You've been so nice. I never thought I'd meet someone else with a heart of gold. So I want you to have mine, too. I had a nice day.
No, but for real, that was more emotionally effective than anything in the base game. I don't have a smooth transition now. I don't know, tentacles? In case it wasn't obvious, the theme this time is Lovecraft. Given the framing device, you already know this was my second favourite DLC. I still enjoyed my time with it quite a bit, but a few more of those problems from the base game crop up in this one. But first I want to explore what this DLC does really well. A DLC for a AAA game about a gay wedding is awesome, especially in a world where even having a gay character in the game is seen as some taboo political scheme. Borderlands has pretty much always been one of the most progressive games on the AAA scene. In fact, I dare say that the games are so gay that anyone who would try and say that a gay wedding doesn't belong has probably stopped playing after Borderlands 2. The way Borderlands does representation is to have lots of it and to not make it a big deal. This is a universe where nobody cares what your preferences are, which I think is great. There's maybe something to be said about the non-binary character being an inhuman robot and also being played by a cis actor, but that is super duper not my criticism to make. For my part, I'll ask, how many non-player driven gay weddings can you think of in games? The answer is probably zero, or that you've played some obscure underrated indie game that you wish more people would play, and the industry talks big about its commitment to inclusion and diversity, But when you compare, say, Ubisoft forcing male protagonists into their games, they all look pretty laughable by the comparison. I've talked about this a lot because in the real world, it's important that these characters are gay, but I don't want to make it seem like that's all there is to their characters. In fact, a big part of this DLC is them struggling with the relationship because of how different their personalities are. But also, rare for Borderlands, it's actually kind of important that they're gay. This DLC leans heavily on Lovecraft, both in its environment and its story, and I think that pairing that with a gay relationship is pitch perfect. I've never read Lovecraft, I'm not a big horror fan, but I know enough about the guy to say that he probably wouldn't approve of an interracial gay marriage. I'm instantly reminded of H-Bomber Guy's video about Lovecraft, where he talks about his experience with an obscure Lovecraft movie adaptation, and how Lovecraft's brand of horror meshes perfectly to the gay experience, and how Lovecraft's works can be reclaimed from the man himself and his hateful ideas about gay people, about people of other races, about people of different races being in relationships. What's kind of impressive to me is how they managed to weave Lovecraft's style of horror, the fear of not knowing yourself or slowly becoming something else, into the subtext of the story. When scoping out the venue for the wedding, Wainwright and the player discover and stop a ritual being done by a married couple. They kill the husband, who, when dead, disappears, leaving a regular person in his place, and a ring. Wainwright is drawn to put on the ring and slowly starts to become the husband. It's space magic, don't worry about it. So here's our gay groom, slowly being forcefully turned into a straight man. Throughout the game, the wife, Eleanor, will taunt you, claiming that the love between Wainwright and Hammerlock isn't real, that it will never be as real as the love between her and her husband. And while she never says it's because they're gay, the subtext is there. Obviously everything ends happily, but thematically this DLC has a lot going on, more than any of the others, and especially more than the base game. The story of Vincent and Eleanor is about how a thirst for knowledge turned them into literal monsters, which is very Lovecraft, but it's also about love, and how it can make you do crazy things. In this case, crazy evil things. Then there's also the idea of marriage itself. Wainwright and Hammerlock both express their fear that they're not right for each other, and they don't know if it'll work out. AKA, fear of the unknown, the most basic aspect of Lovecraft's work. All of this stuff is solid, which might make you wonder what exactly my issue is. Well, the problems start to come up with the things surrounding the main plot. Gage shows up in this DLC, and thematically she doesn't add much. You could see her as more of a grounding element for the weird places the story goes, and I like her, so I'm fine with her being there. It's some of the other characters that seem very out of place. Aista is a trophy hunter you meet quite late into the story, and he's just weird. I honestly have no idea what to make of him or how to contextualize him in the story. He's very obviously a reference to something, but I have no idea what that is. And then there's Mancubus Bloodtooth. He's that character. Knows everything you need to know, looks and talks in a creepy, foreboding way, is probably secretly evil. He's that character. This guy is where we get to bring back that good old mystery box. Is he secretly evil? How does he know so much? What's his deal? Fuck you for asking. I understand in this particular instance that mystery and never getting all the answers kind of plays into the Lovecraftiness of the DLC. But for me, all it gave me was nostalgia for the base game, where nothing was ever answered and open plot threads were completely ignored. To my mind, a mystery is only fun if there's an answer to be found, if there's dots that actually connect and answers to the questions. Without that, it's not really a mystery, it's just meaningless speculation. We're most likely never going back to Xylurgos. We're not going to see Mancubus ever again. This is their only chance to answer these questions, and they just don't. Maybe this kind of thing only bothers me, and the only real reason for this character is to have the Game Grumps guy do a funny voice. But I like mysteries. I like thinking about this stuff, and the mysteries that this DLC does provide are interesting. The history of Eleanor and Vincent, the origins of the monster, and one of the best side quests in the whole game, which I'll talk about on its own. The lack of commitment to explaining this one mystery is very frustrating, but maybe that's just me. Let's get back to some more praise. The star of Borderlands continues to be the art direction. There's no denying that the first time you see just how big the monster is, you have to just pause for a second and admire. Then the town itself, built around the body of this giant monster, is just great. The tone is perfect, and while it never feels real like the Handsome Jackpot, it does feel right. Again, this DLC strives to be more visually diverse than the base game, the cold blue of the archives into the odd greens of the mushroom forest, and then the frozen lake and windswept mountain peak, all leading to when things get super weird and you descend into the monster itself. This DLC honestly has a ridiculous amount of work put into it, and it deserves a whole lot of respect. The people of the town are all afflicted by a personal curse. These are pretty much all played for comedy, but it was a joke. I was impressed with how many silly curses they could come up with, which leads us to Burton Briggs. Burton Briggs is the Lovecraft protagonist of this DLC. He's a detective whose curse is he can't remember things. The way he speaks to the way he looks is all based on a more typical Lovecraft adaptation. He basically looks like that guy on the box art of Call of Cthulhu, a game I'm never going to play because, spooky. Initially, his curse is also played for comedy, but then in his personal side quest, the game took a turn that I wasn't expecting, and I'm honestly surprised they pulled off so well. They turned that curse tragic. Burton is investigating a missing girl because he told himself to, but he doesn't really know why. Over the course of the quest, it's revealed that he had a daughter who was taken by Vincent and became his host, who Burton then killed, not knowing it was his daughter. And he doesn't remember any of this. It's so tragic and horrific that the jokes just disappear for a while, but it works. It feels like the world is warping to this quest and growing darker along with it. This questline has so much work and detail put into it that I wonder if it was originally part of the main story but got moved to side for time, which is a decision I'd agree with, but still it really worked for me. And this random NPC named Burton Briggs somehow became one of my favourite characters.
Sweetie, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was you. I couldn't save you.
It's okay, Papa. Don't cry.
No, it's not okay. It's never gonna be okay. Because you're gone. I'm so sorry.
I forgive you, Papa. And I think I can leave now.
No.
I love you, Papa.
I love you too, sweetie. Always.
And then Claptrap is in this DLC.
So, I battled a wizard in a contest of wits atop the spire of racking despair. I lost horribly and he imprisoned me, but luckily, I still had Paul with me, so I busted out!
Did I mention to you that Borderlands 3 has a tonal problem? In summary, I like this DLC quite a bit. I may have made it sound like I liked it significantly less than Handsome Jackpot, but that's not the case. It just did a few things that I didn't quite agree with. I like it when Borderlands takes itself seriously. I wish it did it more.
Sheriff drew up a bounty of blood for any mean bastard crazy enough to take on the Devil Riders.
Bounty of Blood is weird. It's weird for how unweird it is, which is what makes it weird. Let me explain. Our theme this time is Western, specifically revenge Western, and they actually, and I cannot stress enough how weird this is, they take it seriously. The jokes kind of just disappear for this DLC. At least in the main plot they do. There's also no returning characters. It is a completely new cast, which makes it the first DLC in the series to do that since, Mad Moxie's Underdome Riot, which was also the second DLC ever. Even Captain Scarlet had a couple characters pop up. To complete the total tonal whiplash, this DLC is fully narrated by an unnamed, unseen figure who speaks over the whole affair in a deep, husky cowboy voice, and it feels like none of this should work, and yet somehow it does.
Off she went. Hard as nails, that one. Don't worry, she'll be back in this story soon enough. Vault Hunter moved on. Bounty was calling. Bet you're wondering how I know all this. Well, you'll just have to take my word for it. At times this story might stretch near to breaking, but I swear on my mother's unmarked grave it's true.
So here we have a fairly serious revenge western in the middle of our Borderlands. And you know what? I like it. The story is that you've taken on a bounty for a group of desperados called the Devil Riders, named so because they ride these things called devils. They're led by this lady who shows up in town and kills the sheriff and steals a big, orb. He tells you, as he's dying, to deputize the former raider called Juno, and from then on it's all revenge all the time, baby. Well, kinda. The orb was actually a giant monster egg. See, the company used to run genetic modification experiments on this planet, and one of them made this big monster, and Butcher Rose intends to rule the planet with it, so you kill the big monster. The end. Did I explain that too fast? No, it really is just that short. This DLC is a good 2 to 3 hours shorter than the last two, which is ironic given the source material, but makes a lot more sense when you consider that these next two DLC were most likely fully developed during the Year of Hell, while all the devs were stuck in quarantine. I totally understand how annoying it is to work under those conditions, and I'm not insinuating that this DLC feels unfinished, because it doesn't. There's a lot of love and care put on display here, but there's noticeably less work than the previous DLCs, which I wouldn't even fuss about too much if they weren't being sold at the same price. This lack of new content isn't just limited to the shorter story, unfortunately. Handsome Jackpot saw the addition of an entire new enemy faction in the Loader Bots, along with the Reskin Bandits. Guns, Love and Tentacles added a whole new faction with the Bound, but also 3 new kinds of animals and another reskin of regular bandits. Bounty of Blood adds 1 new animal type, reskinned bandits with cowboy hats, and sometimes they ride on dinosaurs that are also from the base game. I cannot stress enough that I understand this, and all things considered, I'm willing to forgive it, but I had to acknowledge it before moving forward. On to something more positive. Art direction once again steals the show. Somebody had the clever idea to combine the cowboy aesthetic with a samurai aesthetic, and it works really well. It's more subtle in some places than others, but it gives everything a much more interesting look than if they just used one or the other. And where this DLC really shines is its cinematic shots, true to its theme once again. This tiered hot spring actually made me pause to admire, and I love it when games make me do that. Along with the hot springs, there's the dusty desert town, the surrounding area, the strange green-hued caves, and the abandoned company facility, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail. If I have one criticism of the culture mashup element, it's that sometimes makes the characters sound like gigantic weebs in a way that sort of clashes with the serious tone they were trying to hit.
Stop where you are, stranger!
Hold your fire, you baka bastards! That ain't a devil rider. Hey there, Tomodachi. I'm Titus, sheriff's deputy. Come here for a sec. Let's have a chat.
I feel like this video can't express just how weird it was to play this DLC for the first time without any jokes in it. Well, there's not zero jokes, and some of the side quests are definitely on the sillier side, but overall this DLC has more in common with Borderlands 1 than anything else, which is so strange. It shares the first game's incredibly low-key humour style. Quite fittingly to the subject matter, this DLC feels like an experiment. Can they capture that more serious tone again? Personally, I think the answer is yes, and I hope they do it more, but what the fan response is, I have no idea. In fact, let me just check the Google review. Oh no! Yeah, I can't exactly say that surprises me. Another experiment in the DLC is the Metroidvania elements. As you progress through the story, you're given a few gadgets that unlock new areas via things in the environment, like jump pads, a second fancy punch glove that lets you punch crystals, and access to two-way teleporters. I think this is a sort of fun idea, but it needed a bit more development. Punching a crystal to make something blow up is fun. The first time anyway. After the 5th time the game makes you do it, the wow factor is fairly gone. And there's only a couple instances I can think of where these gadgets actually allowed access to new areas outside of the story. Still, with some refinement, I wouldn't mind a return to this idea. When it comes to the more serious tone though, I can't deny that the characters suffer, because they can't be more silly and wacky, come off as a bit dull. Especially this guy, who I honestly can't even remember the name of. Where the tone does benefit hugely though is the way it brings back that core critique of capitalism I mentioned earlier, this time in a more serious way. There's a minor mystery in the DLC as to who the company was that was doing all these experiments. The people of the planet refuse to speak their name, but I, and I think most players, will probably assume it was Maliwan given the Asian influences and the fact that Maliwan were a minor villain in the base game. The other contender is Jacobs, but come on, the last DLC was about the CEO of Jacobs getting gay married. Then you reach the old facility and the aesthetic becomes a lot more familiar, and that's when I started wondering if maybe it was just a new company that they made up for this DLC. It was going to be another big mystery box that they would never reveal. And then a big fancy presentation room.
Welcome to the facility. Our elite team has been recruited from throughout the system to participate in Project Endless Horizons. All of our exciting progress is thanks to Malleus Mutatio, or Core. None of our projects would be possible without it. Core, the element that sparks new life into our bio-enhanced flora and fauna. Core, which fuels our experimental weaponry and tech programs. From our groundbreaking Telezebra network to innovations in long-range ballistics, this is Project Endless Horizons, the future of the
amateur science, astronauts, war heroes, Olympians. You're here because we want the best, and you are it.
This whole area is basically Portal 2, right? With the old company and the experiments and the retro aesthetic and the two-way portals. Tell me I'm not going crazy here. All jokes aside, this one genuinely worked for me. It's a sharp return to the core of the franchise. Just because Wainwright is a cool dude and friendly with you doesn't mean Jacobs is any better than the rest. They still exploit their workers. They still run experiments to create super soldiers. This stuff isn't ancient history either. People who worked at the company are still alive. So this all happened under the control of Wainwright's dad, who died just before the main game. Jacobs still develops nukes.
Impact in 3, 2, 1.
Oh, so close.
The sky was split open. A wound like Gehenna hadn't felt in generations. Ruin was here.
This was the second moment where I paused. In the story, this action is kind of a little bit meaningless, but it's just stunning visually. It's the kind of thing that wouldn't work with Borderlands 3's in-your-face kind of humour, and it's so much more effective than anything in the base game despite being kind of meaningless. The world of Borderlands is bad. Giant mega companies design super weapons and giant monsters with the only goal of increasing their profits. This is the legacy of Jacobs. This is the company that your friend Wainwright owns now. And do you really think this planet is the only one with a research facility? Will they ever follow through with that? Fuck no. But a man can dream, can't I? God, I'm just nailing these transitions now. Cycle Krieg and the Fantastic Fustercluck is neither fantastic nor a Fustercluck. It's thoroughly average and perfectly understandable, which is really its biggest problem. In sharp contrast to what I just said about Bounty of Blood, Fantastic Fustercluck, God, I hate that name so much, is too normal. It's not in your face enough, and it doesn't do enough to justify its own premise. The idea of this DLC is entering the mind of Krieg, the playable psycho from Borderlands 2, to find out what makes a psycho, which has been a minor mystery in the series since the first game. Discovering the secret involves exploring some of Krieg's memories to find items that will unlock a door, and wait a minute, is anyone else getting deja vu? I don't have a problem with this concept in theory. Overall, I still enjoyed my time with this DLC, but not nearly as much as any of the others because of a wide array of issues that they kind of created for themselves. The first one of these is, boy, I sure do hope you like Krieg, because this DLC is all Krieg all the time, from start to end, which is probably a turn-off for a lot of players because a lot of players probably barely know who Krieg is. Krieg was a DLC player character for Borderlands 2 that came out around 6 months after the initial release of the game. Even if we assume that most players played the game through twice, which is a massive assumption to make, that's still a 2 in 6 chance that they played Krieg. And even with all of that, Borderlands 2 has a silent protagonist, so you only get to know this character if A, you pay attention to ambient combat dialogue, B, you've played one of the 3 DLC packs where characters have voice lines, C, you've watched a bunch of lore videos. Now, super nerd that I am, I've done all of these things, but I still think this DLC does a bad job of introducing Krieg. You don't even meet the guy until you're already inside of his head. For all it matters to most players, it could be any random psycho on any random planet. For this concept to work, we actually need to know the character first, and if only there was an example we could point to that did this well. Okay, I can't avoid it anymore. This DLC is conceptually identical to Claptastic Voyage, where if you're not aware, you go inside Claptrap's head to recover some Hyperion secrets that have been hidden in his subconscious. Now, I don't have a problem with similar concepts being revisited. Guns, Love and Tentacles is more than a bit similar to Hammerlock's Big Game Hunt. The problem is it draws an unavoidable comparison between the two, and where Guns, Love and Tentacles surpasses in most ways Big Game Hunt, Fantastic Flustercluck just fails in every regard compared to Claptastic Voyage. To start with, Claptrap is one of the most well-known and established characters in the franchise. He's the second character you ever meet in the series. He was integral to the plot of Borderlands 2. He was playable in the pre-sequel, the game where playable characters are actual characters. Every player can be expected to know Claptrap very well, even if they don't like him very much. And so going inside his head makes sense, unlike Krieg, who's just some guy we barely know. The second issue is my own. I don't like Tannis. I think she's boring, and she's basically the only other character in this DLC, since everything else is just a figment of Krieg's imagination. As a comparison, Handsome Jack was the mission runner in Claptastic Voyage. Full Handsome Jack, not just regular Jack, and the DLC explores his newfound darkness as the DLC progresses. Tannis is just same old Tannis, except her typical hashtag wacky scientist interrupts just sap any little drama there is away from the story.
I have seen trauma-induced memory fragmentation before, but nothing like this. I cannot begin to imagine the horrors Krieg must have endured here. Oh, yes I can. Note to self, begin list of horrors.
But let's double back for a second. And she's basically the only other character in this DLC, since everything else is just a figment of Krieg's imagination. Krieg's imagination. So this is the major problem. We're going inside the mind of a crazy person. Things should get really, really weird. Things should get Doctor Strange weird. Here's a list of things this DLC considers weird. Floating islands, lots of meat everywhere, psychos riding giant bullets, an evil train. No, I'm not making that up. You fight the train from the opening of Borderlands 2, and it is as interesting as that sounds. An evil train shooting the moon at a castle, people with chess pieces for heads. I don't know, an MC Escher painting? It's all just so dull, so basic, and compared to Claptastic Voyage, it's just kind of embarrassing. Those bullet-riding psychos are the only new enemy type added into this DLC. Everything else is straight from the base game, apart from the loaders, which are straight from Handsome Jackpot. Claptastic Voyage had Claptrap dogs, insecurity bots, glitches, and a whole host of new Claptrap-themed NPCs. This DLC has characters ported from the base game, only some of them are evil now. Does that mean they're crazy, exaggerated monster versions of characters we know? No, they're just purple, like they're corrupted by shadow magic. Compared to
Hope and self-esteem. Yeah. So, basically, I took them, and I made them better.
I'm not asking this DLC to be the same. I want this to go in a completely different direction. Claptastic Voyage is all grounded in computers. Jokes and ideas are all based around being inside a computer. This needed to go fully psychological and much darker. It briefly teases that direction in the third and final memory, Krieg's time in a Hyperion laboratory. For a good half hour there, this DLC shows its full potential as things start disappearing before your eyes. You fight against a mad scientist, you see Krieg giant in the sky on a torture table, and the best thing in this whole DLC, this hallway. You can see me pause as I walk through it just to admire it, because it's the only thing like this in the whole DLC, when really the whole DLC should have been this trippy. And once again, here stomps that elephant into the room. Is this DLC disappointingly bland due to a lack of creativity, or is it due to the year of hell? I don't think we can ever know the answer to that question, but I suspect it's a bit of both. This is the same team that brought us The Bound, so I think that the lack of enemy variety is probably due to quarantine. But when it comes to the environments and the evil goddamn train, there's definitely a lack of vision here. Maybe they should have gone for something a little bit less ambitious. Maybe. Of course, there's some problems back from the base game too. As expected, Maya shows up in this DLC and she's handled about as well as she was in the base game. We still don't know much about her as a person, and her relationship with Krieg is basically non-existent outside of the animated short where he was introduced, and tons of fan art. They don't really do anything with it either. I thought maybe they were trying to do a thing about grief, but there isn't any moving on moment. She just sort of hangs around. Krieg doesn't resent the player or Ava or the Calypsos for bringing her death. He's totally passive on the issue, and it's just boring. The other issue is one last glimpse into the endless void that is that fucking mystery box. Right at the end of the Hyperion lab, Krieg tries to remember his old life, and we see a glimpse of a family walking away before he announces it's all gone.
It's gone. It's all gone.
Look. Writer people. Fans have already been speculating about this for 7 years. We are literally inside this guy's head. This is the time to answer the questions. If you're a lore fan, what did this DLC even teach you about Krieg? The name of the scientist who experimented on him? The fact that all psychos have a big semi-naked man inside their heads? Are you satisfied? Because I'm not. Just to fill you in, don't worry, the big semi-naked man is gone now. There's a popular fan theory that Krieg is Tiny Tina's dad, based on some elements of Krieg and Tina's backstory coinciding. This flash here of a family walking into a portal shows what appears to be Krieg with a wife and daughter. The little girl is wearing a dress that was also mentioned in the backstory of Tina, and the mother has a similar hair to Tina. If you subscribe to the theory, this pretty much confirms it the way I see it, but for reasons beyond my comprehension, they want to keep it a mystery. 7 years! Answering questions and confirming theories is good. Please do it. Also, as my final nitpick, they use the Mark II loaders from Handsome Jackpot even though this memory takes place before Borderlands 2, so they should be the Borderlands 2 loaders. And again, this is probably a Year of Hell thing, but the OG loaders are in Handsome Jackpot. They go by so quickly that I didn't even notice them at first, but look, there they are. I think the obvious question is, what now? What is the future of Borderlands 3? I don't think for a second we're done with DLC, but the question is, will it be Headhunter style content like Borderlands 2's Year 2? Or will they go full Destiny with it and just keep going with the full DLC packs? There's really no sense of finality to Fantastic Fusterclucks, so that's kind of what I'm expecting right now. And also the fact that they've confirmed new skill trees for each of the characters. It would be weird to release new skill trees for some bonus missions. So, with that all being said, and if that turns out to be the case, I'll see you next year, I guess. So, making them sympathetic and kind of heroic, it feels weird to me. It makes me uncomfortable.
So, what I would say in response is getting two campaigns from different perspectives isn't a new thing. Like the Transformers games, you get